Welcome to Living the Word. We are studying the Sermon on the Mount taken from Matthew 5 through 7. We have completed Matthew 5. We're in Matthew 6, and we're going to begin today at verse number 25. We're going to talk about worry. Interesting. But before we do, I want to say thank you for those of you that are tuning in for the first time. We're glad to have you among our class. And for those that have begun this walk with us from the very beginning, don't forget what we've talked about, please. And remember the premise of this class. Remember the purpose of this class is for you to learn how to live the Word in your daily life. Put it in your life daily. And remember the purpose of this is so that we begin to look like Jesus as we walk through this land. Now, that's a great challenge. And as I said on last week, as you learn these things and put them into practice, it's probably going to take the rest of your life to perfect them because it just doesn't happen overnight. You're going to have moments when you do good and not so good. But we serve a loving Father that understands our human frailties and limitations. So all that we ask is that every day you do your very best. Now, before we get into our lesson this morning, I want to go back and look at some things that we've talked about and kind of highlight them and bring them back to your attention, and then we're going to move on from there. When we began in chapter number 5, you will notice, if you go back and read, that much of what Jesus was saying initially were things that affected our hearts. They weren't actions that followed out. They were inner corrections. He recalibrated our hearts. And for example, when he talks about murder and he says, the law says, do not commit murder. But I say, don't even be angry. Because Jesus recognized, and he's telling us to recognize, that long before you ever commit murder, you have to first be angry enough to desire to kill another person. And Jesus recognizes that inside of that, the intention of God is to never, for us never to get that angry at anybody that we would want to kill them. So he's working on our hearts and ridding ourselves of the things that we call us, our own style of justice. Remember, we talked a lot about vengeance, how sometimes vengeance is necessary, but it's never our job. God said, vengeance is mine. I will repay. And we always have to remember in every instance where there's an injustice that demands vengeance, it's not our job. God is trying to keep our hearts pure. And we cannot have pure hearts if all we think about is evil towards other people. That's why he says, love your enemies. Pray for those that persecute you. Tough words. Tough words last week, but necessary. Because being human, we are going to have those type of problems with people. We're going to encounter that. All of us encounter bad, evil people. And Jesus is saying, when you do, pray for them. Don't get mad and want to take them out. Pray for them. Not easy to do. Another thing that we noticed that I want you to see as you read through the Sermon on the Mount is that moving from Matthew 5 to Matthew 7, he begins in the heart. And then later, as you move through, you're going to see the words of Jesus extend into our actions, the things that we do that people see. So it starts here and moves outward. Now, one of the areas that had an impact on what Jesus said was the fact that the Jews that Jesus talked to, his audience, lived under Roman occupation. They lived in Rome, and Rome dictated much of what they did. And one of the one of the rules was that it was a military rule that if a military man walked through your property, he could compel you to carry his pack 1 mile. Now, understand what I'm saying. I didn't say that he could ask you to carry his pack. I said compel. There's a difference there. When someone compels you to do something, you must do it whether you want to or not. And I'm sure that was the case with the Jews. Whenever they were compelled to do this, I'm sure they did that begrudgingly, but nonetheless they had to do it. So how can Jesus now turn this around so that in fulfilling this law, you can do it with a gladdened heart? That's an interesting point, isn't it? He's going to take something that we hated doing and cause them to do it in gladness. You know what he came up with, don't you? He said, carry it too. Lamar, that's ridiculous. It's bad enough that I have to take this 1 mile. Now you're telling me to carry it too? Absolutely. Now let's look at the effect on the heart and why Jesus said that. Remember, he knows what's best. Even when we don't realize that, he knows what's best. And that's why it's always in our best interest to follow what he says. So if you compel me to do something that I don't want to do, remember also he said, if they ask for your cloak, give them your tunic too. Remember all of that? He said, if they compel you to do one, and you have it in your mind to go beyond that, you negate the law. You negate the feelings of being compelled because you're looking for the second mile. You're preparing for the second mile because you know the second mile is going to mess his head up. He's not going to understand what's wrong with you because you are gladly walking the second mile. I'm sure they were used to the Jews giving them dirty looks and lip service as they had to cross and carry that first mile. And they wanted to do that. They probably enjoyed the reaction that they got. But what happens to that reaction when you are glad and you're walking the second mile with joy? You strip them of everything that they were trying to do to you with a bad, evil intention. You see how that works? That is the principle that God is trying to instill into his people. If you do what I say do, don't look at how others, what they do. Don't pay attention to how they act and react. Do what I tell you to do. And you will always glorify me. Not you. You'll glorify me. And when you do that, they will see me living in you and be drawn to me. And that's our purpose, isn't it? Why else would he leave us here if not to help others find the way? So as we look into verse number 25, I'm going to read a little bit here down to 34. He says, therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life. We could stop there and talk about that all day. Because who doesn't worry about their life? But listen to what he says. What you will eat or drink? Or what about your body? What you will wear? He said, isn't life not more important than food? And the body more important than clothes? Well, of course it is. Then he says, look at the birds. In verse number 26, look at the birds of the air. They do not sow or reap or stow away in barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not more valuable than they? Of course we are. Who of you by worrying? This is the line for all you worriers out there. Who of you, all you warriors, line up and tell me which one of you can add a single hour to your life. Tell me how worrying can add a single hour to your life. Verse 28. And why do you worry about clothes? See how the lilies of the field grow. They do not labor or spin. Yet I tell you that not even Solomon in all his splendor was dressed like one of these. If that is how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and tomorrow is thrown into the fire, will he not much more clothe you? O you of little faith. That's an indictment for the worrier. He broke it down and didn't just say, don't worry. He's pointing out why we shouldn't worry. And then for those that still want to worry, he indicts you by saying, "O you of little faith." He goes on in verse 31. So do not worry, saying, what shall we eat? Or what shall we drink? Or what shall we wear? Uh-oh. Listen up. For the pagans run after all these things. Remember what we talked about last week. And we established some things that Jesus says repeatedly that are never good. When he says, "Oh, you of little faith," that's never a compliment. As when he calls us pagans or tax collectors. These aren't words of endearment. They're words to make us look at ourselves and conclude within ourselves, this is not how I want to be. And so when he says, you pagans, even the pagans run after all these things, he's telling us that believe in him and are his children, you are not pagans, so don't you run after these things. He says, and your heavenly Father, get this now, knows that you need them. You see, God knows everything that we need. We don't have to worry about taking care of ourselves. We can't. Honestly, we can't. I want you to consider for a moment last night as you slept. Well, let's do this first. Let's think about you're awake, you're sitting there, and suddenly your breathing becomes labored. You're short of breath for some reason, maybe it's pollen or whatever it is. Your breathing is labored, and it becomes of concern to you. In a few moments, it becomes of greater concern. And if it doesn't stop, it becomes of such concern that you go seek medical help. But what about when you sleep? How do you keep yourself breathing while you sleep? No, listen. I didn't say how do you breathe. I said how do you keep yourself breathing while you're asleep? Well, come on. We know the answer. We don't. God takes care of that. He takes care of us when we are totally unaware of it. And that's the point. You're worrying about things that you shouldn't even worry about. As a matter of fact, the point that Jesus is making here is that you're worrying about things that God takes care of. Is he suggesting, could he be, that we think in our hearts that we can do a better job of taking care of ourselves than God? Wouldn't that be terrible to think that? But yet there are those that do. But he said, not my children. That's what the pagans do. Not my children. He said, therefore, Now, remember the rule, whenever you say that we read therefore, it always refers to what has been said. So I like to say therefore, based on what I said before, and it's a summary statement. Take everything that I said to you, and we're going to boil it down into this one statement that I want you to hear. And he said, therefore, based on everything I told you about how God takes care of you, do not worry about tomorrow. And watch, he's going to tell you why. He said, for tomorrow will worry about itself. And then he concludes with this statement here. Each day has enough trouble on its own. Now, when you really think about what's going on right now and the reason why we're having class the way we do, this is kind of apropos. Because worry and panic is running rampant right now in many. But he tells us not to worry. I want to kind of analyze what Jesus is saying here in these 9 verses. I want to point out, first of all, that if you look at the scriptures, the section on prayer that includes the Lord's Prayer is 10 verses long. It's the longest section of one particular statement that Jesus makes is with the Lord's Prayer in it. But worry has 9. Did you ever think about that? That's how important it is and to God, and how critical it is in our life that we do it, that it's only 1 verse less than the section that talks about the Lord's Prayer. Now, let's be honest. I think that for us to say we don't worry, I don't know if we're being totally honest there. I think it's without question, it's within the nature of a human being to worry. It's how we're wired. It's almost natural. But it's only natural in the human sense, not in the spiritual, whereas where God is recalibrating us and saying, listen, stop walking in the physical. Walk in the spiritual and know that I am taking care of this for you. So don't worry about it. That's part of the power of being God's children, isn't it? We don't have to concern ourselves with things that the world does because God said, I'm taking care of that for you. And he's telling us, he said, the things that are paramount in your mind, the things that you can get overly concerned about, I got that. I'm in control. And because I'm in control of those things, you don't have to worry about them. So what should we concern ourselves with? That's probably the major question right now. And he tells us in verse number 33, seek the kingdom of heaven. In other words, stop thinking about yourself and this life, this place in which you live in the physical, and think about what's important. What's really important are the things of God, not the things of man. Because when we do that, we automatically conclude that God is big enough and capable enough to take care of us. I want you to remember, he managed to create everything we see without our help. Right? Even us. And if you think about how wonderful he made the human body is, he did all of that without us. So why does he need us to worry about these little things? He doesn't. James 4:13 and 14 reminds us of one fact that we should never forget. And Jesus is kind of saying that when he's saying don't worry about tomorrow, because James says tomorrow doesn't even belong to us. It's not promised, only today. So basically what he's saying, James is saying, and underlying what Jesus was telling us, you're taking your energy for today and wasting it on worrying about a tomorrow that you don't even know if it's going to come for you. Because we don't know if we're going to be here tomorrow or not. So God is calling us and reminding us today. Stay in the moment. Stay in today. Know that I'm taking care of you and you focus on me and you'll be okay. Worrying, all it does, worry about tomorrow, it just robs us of our ability to influence others. And it keeps us from doing good today. So if you're worrying about something that may or may not happen tomorrow, how can you care about someone that needs your attention today? I want you to think about that. We can sit at home during this time of the virus and worry about what the virus is doing. We can worry about if we're going to get it. We can worry about all of these things that may or may not happen. Or we can spend our time touching other people, calling the elderly, just so they'll have somebody to talk to encourage one another, to find someone that you have been meaning to find time to call and talk to and spend time with them. You have time now. We've been so busy, aren't we? We're so busy, we never have time. And that's the first thing that we always tell people. I meant to call you, but I just didn't have time. And I think God was tired of hearing that. So you know what he did? He gave us all time. He said, how much more do you need? You have time now. So do something positive with that time. Don't sit and fret and worry. And one of the easy things to do right now is during this time is to be upset and angry because we can't go where we want to go. It's beautiful outside, but we can't leave the house. So we sit frustrated. God said, no, don't sit frustrated. Look at the opportunities that sitting at home gives you. Not only among your family, time that you've been needing to spend together, but think about others in your spiritual family, in your physical family that you haven't talked to in a long time. There are people that I honestly would love to talk to. And when I have a moment to do that, I always conclude, I said, they're probably all busy doing something. It's probably not a good time for them. You know what? No one's doing anything right now. Everybody's sitting at home. So that person that you've been thinking about calling, this is the perfect time to call them. And not only is it a good time to call, but it says a lot to them that in this time, you took the time to call them. You thought about them enough to call them. Isn't that a wonderful use of our time? More so than just worry about piddly things like how we're going to do anything that we have no control over. So what are you saying, Lamar? As I prepare to end the class today, I want to leave you with a thought, an important thought. A thought that's not only worthy of our consideration, but worthy of our dedication. I want you to dedicate yourself to this thought. God has tomorrow under control. He's got it all figured out. He's doing all the work. God's going to do it. He's going to take care of tomorrow, and we're not him. We're not God. So let us think about that. I'm not going to go any further today. I just wanted us to unpack the thought of worry because it's such a paramount problem right now in our society. Everyone's worried. And it's in moments like this that God can really shine out of us. Wouldn't it be wonderful for you to call someone and they get started on the worry conversation? They're expressing their worry and concern to you, and you don't bite on it, you don't react to it, and they catch on after a few minutes and say, why aren't you worried? You don't seem to be bothered by this at all. Aren't you worried? And you say, no, absolutely not. Well, why not? Because God's got it. He promised me he was taking care of it, so I don't have to. No, I don't worry. I follow the law. The law tells me to stay home, I stay home. The law tells me to do this, I do that. But I trust God. My trust is in God to take care of this. Because here's the thing. Where did this virus come from? Everybody's asking the question. And I don't know, so don't look to me for an answer. But I do know one thing. I see the good that's coming out of it. I see families learning how, once again, to spend time with each other. Kids are coming off of their electronic devices and sitting with parents and having conversations at the dinner table like it used to be, like it needs to be, so we can be in one another's lives. Husbands and wives are learning how to communicate. We can't go to work and hide from each other anymore for those that do that kind of thing. We have to deal with each other. So relationships are growing. Families are growing. And calling one another and thinking about one another is another way of expressing love at a time like this. So are you telling me that this is such a bad thing? Well, yes, it's got some bad attached to it. I feel bad for any family who has loved ones that are sick from this, especially those that have lost loved ones. But I also know that we serve a God that can make good come out of something that even seems bad. And I see churches doing more. I see people reaching out in ways that I've never seen them reach before. So maybe there's a higher wisdom at work here than we realize. And you know what? There is. Because God is still in control. So no matter, regardless how it looks, remember, God's got it and he's in control. I want to thank you for joining us today and being part of our class. We're going to start next week and pick this up at chapter number 7, verses 1 through 6. And get ready, fasten your seatbelts, because we're going to launch off with do not judge. How many times have you been told, stop judging me? Well, we're going to get into that next week. Stay tuned. And we're going to ask you, as you study, to let God's word change your heart. And by all means, follow the law and stay safe. Blessings to you.